The next few slides deal with consumer surplus and producer surplus. This really isn't too hard of a concept. Let's say that you like to play video games and the new Call of Duty game came out. How much money would you be willing to spend on it? Some of you might not be willing to spend any money on it, but there's going to be one or two of you in the class that really likes this game and want to have it. You might be willing to spend, let's say, $80 on it the night that it comes out. So 80 bucks, you know, it's a lot, but I'd be willing to buy it. If it was that much, I would be willing to buy it. However, I don't have to pay $80 for it when I go to GameStop. It's only $50. So that gives me consumer surplus. So what would be my consumer surplus if it was worth $80 to me, but I only had to spend $50? Well, you're right. It'd be $30 in consumer surplus. Very simply stated, how much is the game worth to you, subtracted by how much you paid. On this slide is a demand curve for used textbooks. You'll be in this situation next year, I'm sure. Here's our potential buyers: Alicia, Brad, Claudia, Darren, and Edwina. And their willingness to pay. Alicia's willing to pay $59, Brad $45, then $35, $25, and $10. That's how much they're willing to buy a used textbooks for. So looking at the demand graph here, what happens if the textbook is $30? Not a bad deal, by the way. So if the textbook is $30, Alicia, who's willing to pay $59, now has a consumer surplus of $59 minus $30, which is $29 of consumer surplus. Brad also has consumer surplus of $45 minus $30, which is $15. And Claudia also has consumer surplus of $5. The other ones were not willing to pay that much for it, so they did not buy the good. For the total consumer surplus, we would just add up 29 plus 15 plus 5, which equals $49 of consumer surplus. Take a look at the graph below, and again, wherever the price is up to the top of the demand curve, that is where the consumer surplus is located. So you'll be asked to do that on tests, and it will come up in the next unit as well. So the total consumer surplus area is that triangle that's above the price up to the demand curve. There is also producer surplus. Producer surplus is simply the amount a seller is paid minus how much they would have been willing to sell the good for. Measures the benefit to all sellers participating in the market. Here is a supply curve for different producers. We have Engelbert, Donna, Carlos, Betty, and Andrew. And you can see how much they would be willing to sell their textbooks for. So Engelbert's willing to sell his for $45, Donna $35, Carlos $25, Betty $15, and Andrew $5 for their used. So if the price is $30 for the textbook, only Carlos, Betty, and Andrew will be the ones selling their textbook. For Engelbert and Donna, there just wasn't enough money for them it wasn't worth it for them to sell it. So Carlos, you can see his consumer surplus of 30 minus 25, and Betty's producer surplus, and finally Andrew's producer surplus. So here's the producer surplus. You can see the supply curve. If the price is $5, then anything $5 and below to the supply line is the producer surplus. When looking at consumer and producer surplus, I actually like this graph a little bit better than the last two graphs I've shown you on consumer and producer surplus. Here you have the supply curve and the demand curve, and you can see where equilibrium price is at. So the equilibrium price up to the demand curve is consumer surplus. The equilibrium price down to the bottom of the supply curve is the producer surplus. So for this instance, someone's willing to pay an awful lot at point A there for this good. but only has to pay the equilibrium price. That gives them a lot of consumer surplus. Same thing with producer surplus. Someone's willing to sell it pretty cheap at letter C there, but yet they get the equilibrium price for it. So that is a lot of producer surplus for them.